Now, Lemon suggests that the work of these intelligence bureaus will trickle down to enlighten the public, displacing the rumors, spin, and half-truths disseminated by the for-profit press. But his prescription can also read like a formula for technocracy.
Okay, well, there's quite the way to start the rise of the university episode. Here we are inside Columbia School of Journalism at the 2022 Walter Lippmann Colloquium, celebrating the 100th anniversary of his public opinion. And so that is Louis Menand, author of The Metaphysical Club. This is the keynote speech at that weekend conference in which they are considering the crisis of the expert. This is during COVID. And so to be a fly on the wall in this meeting has really helped me understand exactly how this is all happening, and reveals a lot of things as you listen to them speak among themselves. They reveal all kinds of things that they don't even understand that they're revealing. Okay. So that was interesting that he was talking about Walter Lippmann, the creation of intelligence bureaus, and how information was going to trickle down, like trickle down economics. And also stating that the flip side, if not taken care of responsibly, would end up looking like a technocracy. That is the word that he uses. Okay, so from Louis Menand, we're going to go to this next quote here where he talks about the relationship between Walter Lippmann, this future political philosopher, the future Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the founding father of the Council on Foreign Relations, and who these guys right here consider the founding father of modern American journalism. You can listen to them speak glowingly of Walter Lippmann. If I've got the share up. Okay. Talking of his Lippmann's relationship with James. And a reminder that William James is the inventor or the founder or the creator, along with a couple others, the Metaphysical Club, of pragmatism. This is a real first shifting we see of the definition of the truth, from the truth to whether or not it works. So if something in practice, in its practical application works, it therefore is true, which is a sliding away from the definition of what the truth means. Okay, so these are the guys that are obfuscating the very definition of the truth. William James, the first experimental psychologist, and I'll let you listen to Louis Menand tell you, not me.
So Lippmann is sometimes said to have been a student of William James, but there are a number of references to William James in public opinion, but the association is misleading, or the characterization of their relationship. Lippmann entered Harvard in 1906, and James retired in 1907, and Lippmann was never a student of his. But James was still living in Cambridge, and they did develop a relationship. And the story is, this is from Ron Steele's biography, that after Lippmann published an article in a campus publication criticizing an English professor named Barrett Wendell, James came to Lippmann's dorm and knocked on his door to congratulate him for the article. Lippmann was criticizing a book by Barrett Wendell called, and the title is not ironic, The Privileged Classes, in favor of elitism, and William James hated elitists. The storeroom story seems a little far-fetched, but however it happened, they did become friends, and Lippmann is supposed to have gone to the James's house on Irving Street for tea every Thursday. Lippmann was 19 years old when this happened. He had a knack as a young man for attracting the interest of famous older men. He was an older person's idea of a young person. Most people loved William James, and so did Lippmann. When James died in 1910, Lippmann wrote an obituary in which he called James, quote, perhaps the most tolerant man of our generation. He listened to truth from anybody and from anywhere and in any form, from Emma Goldman, the Pope, or a sophomore, preached from a pulpit, a throne, or a soapbox, end quote. And this was exactly right. James was trained as a scientist. His only academic degree was an MD from Harvard Medical School. He was the first experimental psychologist in the United States. His reputation was established by the publication in 1890 of the Principles of Psychology, which is a kind of summation of the state of knowledge in contemporary psychology. But James was personally skeptical of modern science. He didn't think you could understand a thing by measuring it, and he suspected that there are phenomena in the universe that are inaccessible to empirical methods. He spent many years.
Okay, so you see the chipping away at the true definition of the truth. William James admitted there as one of the first ever experimental psychologists, around the same time as Wilhelm Wundt was training the first foreign PhDs in experimental psychology. And the reason why they were going there is specifically because of this social science aspect. There was no such thing in the United States at the time. So if you wanted to educate yourself in the social sciences and the engineering of society, we see, and I'll get into it in this Rise of the Expert or Rise of the University article, that it was necessary to have a bachelor or a master of arts degree. So you were deeply infused with the knowledge of the liberal arts. This was a prerequisite for the German professors, the Prussian professors that were teaching social science at the time. Okay, and so we see this redefinition of the truth. And we'll let Louis Menand continue here, his description in it of the relationship that existed between Walter Lippmann and William James.
The phrase James liked to use was the will to believe. He meant by it that if you choose to believe something, let's say the existence of God, and that belief works for you, then it becomes true. You have picked the goal from the start, though. You haven't started collecting information and evidence that might prove the existence of God. You've decided to believe in God and to see whether that works for you. When Lippmann published Public Opinion, the leading pragmatist and one of the leading public intellectuals in the United States was John Dewey. Dewey admired Public Opinion as an intelligent analysis of issues that he cared about, and he wrote a generally favorable review of the book. 5 years after Public Opinion, in 1927, Dewey published a book called The Public and Its Problems. That book is sometimes taken to be a response to Public Opinion, but actually it's a response to the book that Lippmann wrote after Public Opinion called The Phantom Public, which came out in 1925. As the title suggests, the phantom public is much more pessimistic than Public Opinion about the public's capacity to make informed political judgments. In the phantom public, Lippmann says, quote, public opinion is not a rational force. It does not reason, investigate, invent, persuade, bargain, or settle. The public must be put in its place so that each of us may live free of the trampling and the roar of a bewildered herd, end quote. That sounds kind of elitist. It is elitist. So let me state Dewey's position about democracy, since that gives us a way of understanding what's at stake in Lippmann's Intelligence Bureau's proposal in Public Opinion. Like Lippmann, and like scholars of voting behavior today, Dewey thought that human beings are not political animals. In Philip Converse's terms, most people's political opinions are unconstrained. They don't understand what goes with what, how some opinions rule out other opinions. The term Converse uses for people whose views are constrained was ideologue. He estimated that less than 10% of the electorate are ideologues in that sense. Most voters are effectively just flipping a coin. But Dewey believed that human beings are social animals. Humans are creatures engaged in what Dewey called associated living. It's only by working with others that individuals achieve self-realization. There's no self-realization outside of the group. That's the way Dewey put it, quote, the non-social individual is an abstraction arrived at by imagining what man would be like if all its human qualities were taken away. Society as a real whole is the normal order, and the mass as an aggregate of isolated units is the fiction, end quote. Societies are not the sum of their constituent atoms because atoms are not independent of the molecules they are in. Individuals are always functioning as part of a greater whole. Dewey was therefore thoroughly anti-hierarchical because he did not see that there was anything worth sacrificing the principle of associated living for. We treat people unequally for what? To achieve an end, let's say efficiency, that's not democratic. For Dewey, the purpose of the democratic experiment is to keep the experiment going. The goal of democracy is democracy. There's no other end. This position is obviously at odds with Lippmann's realpolitik. Dewey's solution to the problem of public opinion was therefore simply to provide better education, better conditions for debate. Since anything that distances some people from the decisions of the group is antithetical to the goal of democracy. It doesn't even matter what those decisions are, as long as they foster conditions for associated living. Now, we should not overstate the differences between Lippmann and Dewey. One thing they had in common was their involvement with the progressive movement. Dewey was a founder of the ACLU, the NAACP, the American Association of University Professors, the New York Teachers Union, and the League for Industrial Democracy. Lippmann, as a young man, worked for the investigative journalist Lincoln Steffens, doing work that helped lead to the creation in 1913 of the Federal Reserve. He was a supporter of Theodore Roosevelt and later a supporter of American intervention in the First World War. He drafted the 14 points that Wilson took with him to Paris for the peace conference, and he was bitterly disillusioned by the way the victorious powers handled Germany, though, and like John Maynard Keynes, whom he met and naturally became friendly with, he could see that the post-war treaties were creating the conditions for the rise of a figure like Hitler. So Public Opinion, 1922, and The Phantom Public, 1925, are works of disillusionment. I feel obliged as an English professor to say that one of Lippmann's Harvard classmates was T.S. Eliot, also class of 1910, whose poem of post-war disillusionment, The Wasteland, was also published 100 years ago this fall. The leaders who negotiated the treaties at Paris and elsewhere after the German defeat were operating on rumor and misinformation and making decisions for reasons of domestic politics. Also in 1920, with Charles Merce, he published a study in the New Republic of the New York Times' coverage of the Bolshevik Revolution. They concluded, Merce and Lippmann, that the stories the paper ran were, quote, dominated by the hopes of the men who composed the news organization, end quote. The Times cited atrocities that never happened, and it reported 91 times that the Bolshevik regime was on the verge of collapse. Lippmann wrote that Times' contribution to public knowledge of the Russian Revolution was, quote, about as useful as that of an astrologer or an alchemist. Lippmann was, in addition to his association with the progressive movement and the New Republic, a member of the Fabian Society, and he was friendly with H.G. Wells. In the United States, the book that was regarded as the progressivist manifesto was Herbert Crowley's The Promise of American Life, which came out in 1909. And Lippmann knew that book well. It was an influence on his first book, A Preface to Politics. Lippmann met Crowley in 1914 at Crowley's invitation, and Crowley recruited him to help launch the New Republic, the journalistic flagship of progressivism, and that was really his first major national platform as a political commentator. Progressivism, as you know, was not anti-big business. It accepted the results of the Second Industrial Revolution and the emergence of finance capitalism. Progressives wanted to make big business and finance capitalism more responsible to the needs of the public and less economically disruptive. That was the purpose of the Federal Reserve, of the Sherman Act, passed in the 19th century, and of strong labor unions and state regulation of industry. Progressives wanted to tame capitalism, not to replace it. The progressive view, like the Fabian view, was that the general public lacks the competence to make regulatory decisions. As Lippmann puts it, this is in Public Opinion, quote, the facts of modern life do not spontaneously take a shape in which they can be known, end quote. The economy born of the Second Industrial Revolution and modern technology and the financial system that funds it are things too complex for the average voter to understand. Again, Lippmann puts it again, quote, the Great Society, by which he means the society born of the Second Industrial Revolution, the Great Society had grown furiously into colossal dimensions of the application of technical knowledge. It could not be governed, men began to discover, by men who thought deductively about rights and wrongs, end quote. Thus the need for experts. Lippmann's call for the intelligence bureaus in public opinion, therefore, comes straight out of progressive ideology. As he puts it, there is a need, quote, a need for interposing some form of expertness between the private citizen and the vast environment in which he is entangled. The economic philosophy of progressivism wanted to displace, of course, was laissez-faire capitalism.
Okay, lots there to unpack, including what he just said, is that they were targeting laissez-faire capitalism. This is what they were attempting to overthrow. And so we can start getting into this other definition of capitalism, just like there was a altering definition of liberalism. You know, many people complain about capitalism today without ever mentioning J.P. Morgan, the fact that he Morganized everything, which was the first word that we used for monopolization. And J.P. Morgan is Uncle Rich Pennybags. He's the actual character that's played in Monopoly, and that guy's always pictured with a bag of money running away. So here's the ultimate misdefinition that we see here in the West, is this attack on laissez-faire, and he's admitting it right there. Okay, so we're inside of the university network and the system. These guys are deeply within an echo chamber that's largely liberal and progressive. Okay, so he mentions Lippmann, intelligence bureaus, the expert, how the Great Society had grown too vast for the ordinary citizen, and the vast environment in which he is entangled. They look at us as the bewildered herd, not smart enough to put two and two together. I've banked all my work on the fact that we are far smarter than that. So what we're really looking at here when we're analyzing sort of the ideologies of Lippmann and William James and Dewey is socialism. Menand even talks about how the truth now has become your truth or my truth. This is directly out of pragmatism. And he states that to look at the world that way is actually inductive. So you're already submitting yourself to something less accurate, because it's deductive knowledge and logic that we want to do. We want to be able to follow the breadcrumbs to find out the truth, not to determine what we want the truth to be and then work our way to do it. This is exactly what unfolded in the 20th century. And it's interesting that he uses religion and our belief in religion as an example of how we say that if I'm going to believe in God, therefore it is true. When, you know, every time we associate with the mainstream media and this Association of American Universities, we're asked to do the same thing, is to just have faith in not God anymore, but the scientific expert. So we're going to get into the creation of this major network that was necessary for their engineering of the West, this new social order, this experiment that we all live in, we were all born in. This is how they talk about the New World, and how this Association of American Universities is so important. We're going to go at 2 or 3 more quotes from Louis Menand before we get going, though, because he gets into professionalization now, and how professionalization was installed to make sure that we were all specialized and we only knew little sections of information, much like they divided industrial man by division of labor. Now they're dividing them by knowledge. Okay. So back to Louis Menand. And he's going to start talking about the importance of professionalization, the installation of this idea of professionals into our life. And this is a key part of this expert class. Why all of our headlines say experts say, and we're always in deep reliance, heavily leaning on the opinion of the expert. He's about to reveal why.
A better term for experts sociologically is professionals. Professionals are not just experts, they are credentialed experts. The second half of the 19th century is the era of the professionalization of occupation.
So you can see why that would be important when you're debating whether or not there's a new world order. And this is one of the things that people say that are in this blissful, ignorant, blind belief in the technical expert, is that they're willing to believe a PhD just on the fact that he has a PhD because they trust this system that was created. And we're going to show you just how faulty this system was.
Professionalization is an extension of the principle of the division of labor. It's a consequence of specialization. Take a business that's familiar to all of us, scholarship. The American Social Science Association was founded in 1865 as a group for amateur students of a broadly defined range of social science subjects. With the emergence of the Research University of the United States after 1870, the ASSA began to split up into separate groups. So you get the Modern Language Association, founded in 1883, American Historical Association, founded in 1884. These were followed by associations for economists, 1885, folklorists, 1888, political scientists, 1889, the American Mathematical Society, formed in 1888, the American Physical Society, 1889, the American Sociological Society, 1905. These are all university-based communities of academic professionals, jealous of the autonomy of their disciplines, and as is still the case, with no umbrella organization organizing or coordinating their intellectual activities. At the same time that these national scholarly associations were establishing themselves, non-academic vocations were also forming professional associations. The American Bar Association was founded in 1878. American Medical Association was incorporated in 1879. A National Association of Journalists was founded in 1913, of city managers, 1914, of city planners, 1917, social workers, 1921, of hospital administrators, 1933. These new organizations subscribe to what Stephen Brint calls, quote, social trustee professionalism. They presented themselves as organized for the public good. This was almost the period, this late 19th century, of the rise of professional sports.
Okay, we got out of there just in time, didn't we? Okay, so he's mentioning the rise of professional sports now, and this is exactly how it happens.
At Wayfair, we're game for every style.
Wow.
Let's play cherries.
See how they get you? They'll get you. Okay, so barring that. Okay, so we're talking about the professionalization of this managerial class and the credentialed professional and how important this label is because it really persuades the American public. We can see it very evidently today. And so what I want to actually suggest here is that whenever we take the blissful ignorant approach to life, we're actually opening ourselves up to a certain degree of vulnerability in which we can be exploited by that authority that we're blindly trusting. And we can be exploited directly proportionate to the amount that we're actually trusting. So if we're in complete 100% blind trust, we are going to be manipulated. Okay, so you can get the next one here and we'll just keep moving on. Here he's going to talk about Crowley, the utilitarianism of this new progressive movement. They're going to make everybody of good utility and of good service to the state. So this is exactly what Mussolini was saying. This is exactly what fascist doctrine is. This is the shifting of the definition of liberalism from the classic liberal who would have nothing to do with a factory to the neoliberal calling for a larger, more centralized government in the aid of, minorities and anybody that's suffering under this system of capitalism. Okay. And they never mentioned JP Morgan. This is typical. Okay. So we'll get to Louis Menand here discussing that.
The key to professionalism is the concept of disinterestedness. Disinterestedness, of course, is what pragmatist philosophy of mind regards as illusory. But for the progressives, a disinterested identification with one's work is not only good socially, it is virtually salvific. Here is Crowley in The Promise of American Life, quote, "The ultimate end is the complete emancipation of the individual, and that result depends on his complete disinterestedness. He must become interested exclusively in the excellence of his work," end quote. What makes disinterestedness possible is specialization. The continual admonition of proponents of professionalism is stay in your lane. Again, Crowley, quote, "The good work for which for his own benefit the individual is required to do is primarily technically competent work. The man who has thoroughly mastered the knowledge and the craft essential to his own special occupation is by way of being this well-forged and well-tempered instrument. The authoritative technical tradition associating with any one of the arts of civilization is surely the net result of that accumulated experience of mankind in a given region. It supplies the individual with a language which reduces to the lowest possible denominator the inevitable chances of misunderstanding. It is society's nearest approach to an authentic standard. And just so far as it is authentic, society is justifying in imposing it on the individual."
Okay. So that is the greater good that he's talking about, is being of good utility. This is straight out of Jeremy Bentham ideology. This is the establishment of the industrial democracy that we all lived in our entire life up until now, because it's being switched. He even admits it, that this is the tearing down of the administrative state, and they're going to create a digital version, far more efficient and invisible now. One sec. We'll get to the final quote here, and then we'll get on to the rise of the university, a necessary and important aspect to the rise of the expert. We finish here, at least in this episode, with the 2022 Walter Lippmann Colloquium or Conference. Final word we'll leave to Louis Menand here. Regarding the Morrill Land Grant Acts, 1862, 1890, and 1994. A couple things he doesn't mention through all of this, you'll notice, is that he never mentions the House of Truth. Okay. Disinterestedness as a key aspect of both the clinician and the public. This is that apathy that we talk about, this blissful ignorance. And what does Herbert Crowley call for? But exactly what Mussolini calls for, but the complete emancipation of the individual.
Professionalizations of scholarship that we see in the late 19th and early 20th century accompanied an enormous expansion of higher education in the United States, assisted in large part by state investment in the form of the Morrill Acts of 1862 and 1890. In 1870, there were 500 and some institutions of higher learning in the United States and about 63,000 students. By 1930, there were 1,400 schools enrolling 1.1 million students. In 1870, there were about 5,500 professors in the United States. In 1930, there were 23,600. Professionalism is transmissible, but not transferable. Professionals have authority only in their own domains. Lawyers cannot perform operations. Doctors cannot try cases. Professionalization is a way to use smart people productively without giving them too much social power.
Okay, so fascinating. They're saying here's how we're going to manage the management class. So we're going to give them just enough information, like they did the industrial man to operate factories. They're going to give this professional managerial class just enough information to do their job, which is why many of them get a Master of arts or a Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree. And many of the people that are at the controls of our society have that background. Okay, so without any further ado, I hope that helps giving some background, and you'll see as we go through this article why that's important. Because we will reference back to it several times throughout the story of the rise of the expert. So it's part 8 of this Rise of the Expert series. The rise of the university. And really, this is a necessary aspect to even manifest destiny. This is why I superimposed this network of universities over top of this image showing manifest destiny, this train heading west, the development of human technology, science across North America. So 1 second, before we share that and get into that, I want to just show you this. The development of the internet, the stages in which the internet was created, because this is going to lay over top of this association of American universities, because really that is where the internet comes from. Originally from Stanford Research Institute, they just drove a van around. This is the creation of the internet, I kid you not. Menlo Park, California. This is right around where Huxley, Kesey, and all the 60s counterculture rises. Okay, this is the birth of the ARPANET. We can see it starts as a triad between UCLA, University of California, Stanford Research Institute, and then jets off to where? Isn't that where they collect all the information? So there's your very beginning of the internet in the 60s. Okay. 1969, December, that's what it looked like. Well, we were in the middle of the summer of love, or just finished the summer of love. See, the internet is starting. Here we have in December of 1970. See, it started to grow. It's going transcontinental. And what are the nodes but Carnegie Endowment? It's in Pittsburgh. You've got Harvard, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, of course, Lincoln, probably Lincoln University of some sort. And then you can see that it's now extended to Rand in the West Coast. (1973) goes transatlantic. We're seeing connections to Europe. 1973, 1975. (1977), 1982, 1984. This is the lead up to the internet. We're just about to all understand or get familiar with or be introduced to this thing called the Internet of Things. Fairchild. Semiconductors, I would imagine. That's interesting little connection there for somebody called Diego Garcia. Okay, so just to show you that this network started essentially with this association of American universities that we are going to get into now. Okay, so welcome to the History of Propaganda, where we predict the future by telling the past. Those that don't learn from their past are condemned to repeat it. This is a quote from George Santayana, who trained Walter Lippmann. This is who Walter Lippmann worked with post-grad for 1 year at Harvard, while he was having tea with William James. Okay, so we're going to talk about the origins of the university, first of all. And so 1863, or no, 1663, 1663, over 100 years before America was founded, Harvard was founded. (1694) William and Mary College, birthplace of Phi Beta Kappa. 1701 Yale. 1754 Columbia University. So these are all, major Ivy League universities here in North America, operating before there was even an America. So universitas, a number of persons associated into one body, a society, company, community, guild, or corporation. I emphasize guild because this is really, anytime you see that, it's most likely Fabian society. This is how we call it today. Of course, this is slightly different, but still in the premise of a group of people being protected by their numbers. Harvard and Yale corporations are the heart of the university system, and as we've shown, they fund explorers like the real life Indiana Jones, founding lifetime member of the CFR, Isaiah Bowman. And we see this basically any spot on the world that needed to be investigated that has ancient ruins or any of this, Yale, Harvard, they were really the first to get in there and explore and figure out. So previously we discussed how the entire Western K through 12 education model and then the social sciences at large, the entire field, were introduced to American higher learning through Prussian technology given to the founders of American sociology, economics, history, experimental psychology, and philosophy. These Prussian founded social sciences were grafted onto the American university model. At the same time, traditional curriculum consisting mostly of Latin, Greek, and the classics, the hard sciences, and especially liberal arts, were being removed from common education and placed only at institutions of highest learning. So this movement, part of the broader establishment of a network of American universities during the second half of the 19th century, we call today the Association of American Universities. So there is an accompanying Association of American State Colleges and Universities, and the Association of American University Professors. So we talk about professors being protected through tenure. This is the network that they created. So why was that created? You ask. To protect against the dismissal of men like John Dewey, Edward Ellsworth Ross, Richard T. Ely, Charles Beard, and James Harvey Robinson. These guys are all famously radical. They all got kicked out of either Columbia or Stanford University for being too radical. So these are the fathers of progressivism. All were dismissed from universities due to their highly controversial teachings. John Dewey, a founder of this professors' union, and not by coincidence, one of the men whose reputation was and still is even today immersed in controversy. Founder of the ACLU, founder of the NAACP, and everything else that he just told you about. John Dewey, leading progressive. So as early as the 1840s, we see evidence of a move towards the creation of a network of higher learning centered around the liberal arts. In Illinois, we see the first legislature to petition Congress for federal land grants. Michigan, Massachusetts, and many states then followed. Final resolutions in the state of Illinois stated, quote, whereas the spirit and progress of this age and country demand the culture of the highest order of intellectual attainment in theoretical and industrial science. So the government is loaning land to all of these universities as they spread across the West. So starting to get into the real manifest destiny and the real reasons behind all of the murder of Native Indians makes all the protesting at the universities seem a little contradictory, a little hypocritical, a little ignorant of reality. So the basis of education in the early Middle Ages consisted, as we have seen, of the so-called 7 liberal arts. 3 of these, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, were grouped as the Trivium. The remaining 4 arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music made up the quadrivium. Now, this is straight out of the book by Charles Homer Haskins, the guy that is in charge of national curriculum from the inquiry, from his book, The Rise of the Universities, where he's stating that prior to the universities, a common education was made up of learning the trivium, learning grammar, logic, and rhetoric, learning how to properly communicate and speak to create words into sentences and sentences into paragraphs and paragraphs into compositions that help people understand your point of view or whatever it is that you are speaking of. So you can see why they would remove these from our education system. Same with logic. What's logic built on? But the questions, the W5, who, what, where, when, why, and leading to the how. This is the exact education they removed, and you can see why. Prevented us from putting two and two together, asking, hey, who put this and whose idea was this and when did it start? Where? So the occasion for the rise of the universities was a great revival of learning, not that revival of the 14th and 15th centuries to which the term is usually applied, but an earlier revival, less known, though in its way quite as significant, which historians now call the Renaissance of the 12th century. So long as knowledge was limited to the 7 liberal arts of the early Middle Ages, there could be no universities, for there was nothing to teach beyond the bare elements of grammar, rhetoric, logic, and the still barer notions of arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, which did duty for an academic curriculum. So beside that, I'm providing the source material. So the medieval universities like cathedrals and parliaments are a product of the Middle Ages. The Greeks and the Romans, strange as it may seem, had no universities in the sense in which the word has been used for the past 7 or 8 centuries. They had higher education, but the terms are not synonymous. Much of their instruction in law, rhetoric, and philosophy, it would be hard to surpass, but it was not organized into the form of permanent institutions of learning, including diagrams here showing you that the university actually was a key part to the creation of cities themselves. So only in the 12th and 13th centuries do there emerge in the world those features of organized education with which we are most familiar. All that machinery of instruction represented by faculties and colleges and courses of study, examinations and commencements and academic degrees. In all these matters, we are the heirs and successors of not Athens and Alexandria, but of Paris and Bologna. The contrast between these earliest universities and those of today is, of course, broad and striking. Throughout the period of its origins, the medieval university had no libraries, laboratories, or museums, no endowment or buildings of its own. It could not possibly have met the requirements of the Carnegie Foundation, exclamation point, no emphasis added. Page 4, the rise of the university. So the medieval university was, in the fine old phrase of Pasquier, built of men. Such a university had no board of trustees and published no catalog. It had no student societies, except so far as the university itself was fundamentally a society of students. No college journalism, no dramatics, no athletics, none of those outside activities, extracurricular, which are the chief excuse for inside inactivity in the American college. Another map here just showing that university is actually quite central and important even in the creation of Paris when it's being established. So, and yet, great as these differences are, the fact remains that the university of the 20th century is the lineal descendant of medieval Paris and Bologna. They are the rock whence we were hewn, the hole of the pit whence we were digged. The fundamental organization is the same. The historic continuity is unbroken. They created the university tradition of the modern world, that common tradition, which belongs to all our institutions of higher learning, the newest as well as the oldest. I include this to show just literally the rise of the university and the years that it was associated and it happened and where. Okay, it's just giving more background as to where this all came from, because we're going to get to the Marural Land Grant Acts here momentarily. So the university was a necessary aspect to early Paris, an economic provider for the city. This idea of building an urban center around the university intelligentsia system was adopted in America, as it indicated in the literature of the founders of sociology in our previous article, Brandeis Part 6, The Science of Law. So the first universities created as a security measure, a student collective organized against the townspeople for the prices of rooms and necessaries rose rapidly with the crowd of new tenants and consumers, and the individual student was helpless against such profiteering. United, the students could bring the town to terms by the threat of departure as a body, and there are many historical examples of such migrations. Better rent one's room for less than not rent them at all. And so the student organization secured the power to fix the prices of lodging and books through their representation or through their representatives. Okay, so again, through nice sounding words, they instituted a giant network of mind control, a system of standardization, specialization, professionalization, directly opposed to human betterment. Behind a scholastic paywall goes key intellectual technology once taught in our common schools. Common senses, you could say. The system first founded in Bologna and Paris, still today the predominant system, but the direction of teaching has drastically changed with the inclusion of the social sciences. Today, when it comes to the university, at least, tradition is embraced, and the oldest universities carrying with them the most prestige to trick or fool. A system of academic freedom and institutional autonomy, still the prevalent characteristics of a university mission statement. In 1988, to mark the 900th anniversary of the founding of the first modern university in Bologna, the Magna Charta Universitatum was created and is signed by over 975 universities from 94 countries around the world, and still stands today as the final text in the spirit behind the university. The aims of this document is to celebrate the deepest values of university traditions and to encourage strong bonds among European universities. So what is this knowledge that they removed? Well, good question. See, grammar is the basis of knowledge through the collection of, in this case, I find it erroneous to say facts and data unless you understand that they're subjective. Okay. So knowledge, understanding, wisdom is actually the verbiage that comes out of the Kabbalah. And there is definite relationships here between the university system, Freemasonry, and Jewish mysticism, believe it or not. So the university itself, the entering wedge. So you have institutions now becoming entering wedges, similar to the labor union, only in the intellectual form between us and the most empowering, freeing information. Both used to create a two-class society of the conscious and the unconscious. Our ability to communicate with each other, our ability to discern through the development of our own senses, to know when others are being dishonest, disingenuous, or straight up lying to us, all learned skills of logic and deduction, and all were systematically removed in the name of standardization. Just as there was proclaimed a death of God and then the truth, Latin, the liberal arts, our free will, the free market, our gut feelings were pronounced dead too. These, not by coincidence, are some of the most empowering aspects to the sovereignty of an individual. We talk about property. Property is the most important possession, whether it be ownership of your own labor, ownership of your own mind. Doesn't necessarily have to be land, but it should be. It should include land. You should own land. And the key is to remove yourself from anything that's blocking you from reaching the source, right? In this case, this is why I offer the books. So you can go look yourself. The last thing I want you to do is believe me. That defeats the entire purpose. So hard measurable sciences replaced by soft sciences once thought to be pseudoscience. the domination of the natural world and our human nature the goal. These social engineers strangely embodying the same message found in the Bible when God gave Adam and Eve permission to go forth and be fruitful, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon earth. Just saying. So the Morrill land grant of 1862 and 1890, probably more than any other single factor, the land grant college idea has brought about the tremendous advance in agricultural efficiency. Great agricultural efficiency has made possible the industrialization of the United States through the release of agricultural workers to industry, and therefore our highly diversified and productive and powerful economy. So at mid-19th century, approximately 80% of the United States' workforce were farmers and artisans. Dissatisfied with the classical education offered at liberal arts colleges, educational and political reformers determined that colleges should provide practical learning for the agricultural and mechanical industrial arts. So the Morrill Land Grant Acts of 1862 and 1890 were a response to the Industrial Revolution, and their mission was to provide for the more liberal and practical education of our industrial classes and their teachers. Its mandate also focused on agricultural science, military science, and the mechanical arts or engineering. This is what the A&M means in Texas A&M, agriculture and mechanical arts. This isn't a historical moment in that it marked the first federal funding of institutions of higher learning, sponsored by Senator Justin Morrill. Serving on the House Committee of Agriculture and Committee on Territories, Morrill became convinced that more should be done to place the nation's farming on a scientific basis. So land was taken from Native American tribes, ceded through treaties, agreements, seizures, and under threat of violence. And in many of these agreements, the federal government did not uphold its end of the treaties. It was a movement in complete contrast to the traditional education practiced up until this point, centered on liberal arts curriculum. National Archives. So within the Act of 1862, it states, an act donating public lands to the several states and territories, that there be granted to the several states an amount of public land equal to 30,000 acres, that all expenses of management, superintendence, and taxes from date of selection of said lands previous to their sales, and all expenses incurred in the management and disbursement of the monies which may be received therefrom, shall be paid out of the treasury of states, where the leading object shall be, without excluding other scientific and classical studies, and including military tactics, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanical arts, in order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life. If any portion of the fund invested be diminished or lost, it shall be replaced by the state to which it belongs, so that the capital of the fund shall remain forever undiminished. This is where they start to put everybody into factories, and they're setting all of the legislation and the framework, the foundations to it all here. Subsequent related acts allocated more federal funding for each state. The Hatch Act, $15,000 per year. The Morrill College Aid Act, $25,000 per year. The Adams Act, $30,000 per year, and $50,000 per year from the Nelson Act, 1907. So this income on top of the proceeds each university made from the original land grants of 1862. The total value of property held for the benefit of these institutions amounts to $113 million in 1862, around $500 million in today's dollars, and off the charts in cost, I would imagine. They are working as fast as possible to keep our brains contained and our minds molded and our opinions shaped. But we can start to feel that it is breaking. So congratulations to anybody that is sitting here giving an honest effort and trying to figure out how we got so subjected, so subverted. So the federal gifts for expenses, buildings, and other special purposes amounted to 8 times the value of the income from the proceeds of the original land grants of 1862. If we compare the total income of all these institutions from all sources with the income direct and indirect from federal sources, the disproportion is still more striking. The federal grant for this purpose has clearly proved a great stimulus to the individual states and to private citizens. The university becomes a federally funded perpetual profit machine, fueled forever by benefits accrued from dispossessed native land. So all of these people crying about manifest destiny and how the white man has privilege and he exercised that over the native Indian, and they're doing it at American universities, you can see how they are clearly ignorant of the actual history. So students in 2- and 4-year institutions in the United States as a fraction of 18 to 21-year-olds, 1890 to 1970, you can see, like Louis Menand was suggesting, this massive growth was happening here. Beginning of the 20th century, but really started in the late 1800s in the establishment of this entirely new set of curriculum of K through 12, elementary and basic learning, and then the higher education model. So the Association of American Universities was founded in February 1900 at a 2-day conference that 14 of the nation's leading PhD granting institutions held at the University of Chicago. So the idea for the conference came from University of California President Benjamin Ide Wheeler, who had been proposing the formation of something like the AAU in correspondence with Harvard President Charles Eliot and others. The purpose of the organization, in the words of the Constitution that was adopted at the Chicago Conference, was to consider matters of common interest relating to graduate study. So the founders had quite specific matters in mind. In the quarter century before 1900, American higher education had begun transforming itself using the German university model. It comes straight out of Prussia. So which emphasized advanced study and laboratory research. This is where the social sciences come from. So this is why all of universities now, especially after this introduction of the German university model, are research universities. So which emphasized advanced study and laboratory research. Starting with the Johns Hopkins University in 1876, American universities had grafted the German structure onto the American college model, providing in a single institution both undergraduate education and advanced graduate study and research. Thus was born the American Research University. That's from their own website. So whereas a system of industrial universities, liberally endowed in each state of the Union, cooperative with each other, and with the Smithsonian Institute at Washington, would develop a more liberal and practical education among the people, tend to more intellectualize the rising generation and eminently conduce to the virtue, intelligence, and true glory of our common country. Therefore, be it resolved, the passage of a law of Congress donating each state in the Union an amount of public lands not less in value than $500,000 for the liberal endowment of a system of industrial universities, one in each state in the Union, to cooperate with each other for the more liberal and practical education of our industrial classes and their teachers. We talk about how they're making our world largely liberal, open-minded, this neoliberal version. This is where it starts. We all know that it starts at the universities too, but I think a lot of people fail to understand how deep it goes. So David Starr Jordan was a eugenicist, a member of the Bohemian Club and the University Club in San Francisco. He was president of both Indiana and Stanford. He was a member of the American Philosophical Society. He was an initial board member of the Human Betterment Foundation, advocating mandatory sterilization. So 5 learned societies came into existence in the 100 years following the founding of the first, the American Philosophical Society in 1743. And an additional 6 appeared before 1880. Then the pace picked up and 16 such societies came into existence from 1880 to 1899. Another 28 followed in the next 20 years. From 1900, 5 learned societies came into existence in the 100 years following the founding of the first, the American Philosophical Society. I think I just included that twice. Yep. So the expansion is evident in the social sciences. Economists formed their society in 1885, and the rest quickly followed. Psychologists in 1892, anthropologists in 1902, political scientists in 1903, and sociologists in 1905. So you can see that they are creating this, they're establishing, they're embedding their doctrines into institutions. And this is the primary goal of all of them, was to take these ideas out from the ether of the air and establish them in real, tangible institutions. Many of them have not changed since. So by 1910, the university as an institution had taken shape. The idea of the research university was being widely accepted by 1910. The lecture method was adopted, and the specialization of the entire university system was the goal. So the era of the division of labor in higher learning had arrived. You see Louis Menand talking about this division of knowledge in association with the division of labor. So you've got industrial man learning just enough to operate the factory, machines, and his labor is being divided down the line by 6 or 7 other people. So his power is deeply diminished. But then you see professional man in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s being divided similarly, just intellectually. This is the specialization. This is why nobody's been able to put this history together, because they're all siloed. They're all specialized in their own small little form, trapped within their echo chambers, ultimately. Created on purpose. Really out of the embers of war again. Compartmentalization. You're on a need-to-know basis. This is really militarily inspired. So enrollment tripled from 1910 to 1940, fivefold from 1890 to 1940, quadrupled between 1940 and 1970. From 1638 to 1819, only 49 institutions of higher education, 40 of them private ones, were established in the United States. Then the pace began to step up from 1820 to 1859, 240 more institutions, 225 of them private, were established. The next 40 years witnessed the greatest expansion in the pre-1940 period, with 432 colleges and universities, 348 of those private ones, established from 1860 to 1899. In particular, there were 186 institutions, 151 private, opened from 1860 to 1879, and 246 more, 197 of them private, from 1880 to 1899. Then the number of new institutions being established began to fall off. From 1900 to 1934, only 200 institutions opened. The closing decades of the 19th century, therefore, were the high point in the founding of 4-year institutions of higher education before World War II. So they established it and then shut all else out. Anybody else that wanted to establish another learning institution that taught people anything different than what they were being taught in this Association of American Universities, you would be put on the fringes and eventually disappeared. So for the reason for that peak in the founding of colleges and universities might be thought to be the Morrill Acts of 1862 and 1890. The 1862 Act granted funds to existing and future states to endow universities and colleges that specialized in agriculture and mechanical arts. The 1890 Act set up many of today's historically Black universities and also provided income to the institutions set up by the first act. You can see how this starts to integrate with the Rockefeller funded creation of our K through 12. But overall, about 5 times as many private institutions as public ones were founded during the entire period, and private institutions, more so than the public ones, were disproportionately founded in the closing years of the 19th century. So not only were relatively few institutions founded after the turn of the 20th century, but those that were founded in the 20th century have tended not to be as prestigious. By the 1890s, for example, saw the establishment of Stanford, Chicago, and California Institute of Technology. But among the 35 private institutions in the top 50 universities in the 1999 rankings by US News and World Report, only 3 began college-level instruction in the 20th century, and just 1 was founded after 1910. Those 3, Carnegie Institute of Technology, established 1900, with instruction beginning in 1905, Rice Institute, and our favorite, founded in 1912. Oh, sorry, the Brandeis University was founded in 1948. So the same year that everybody thinks that Israel was created, there's the Brandeis University. Brandeis is a special case. It was established in large measure because Jewish academics and students had long been discriminated against, because large numbers of Jewish scholars took refuge in the United States during the war, and because the Jewish community had amassed funds to found a great university. So the formative years of American higher education from about 1890 to 1940 saw some major changes in the scope of institutions, including the emergence of the research university, the demise of independent professional institutions, and the decline of independent schools of theology and denominational institutions in general. Out with God, in with science. For most of the 19th century, American institutions of higher education were centers of learning, not research. Look around now. It's the exact opposite. Which begs the question, what are they researching? You and me. Norbert Wiener's feedback loop. Systematized, standardized, professionalized. That began to change in the latter part of the 19th century with the founding of the Johns Hopkins University, the first dedicated research center in the United States, followed by Clark University, the first U.S. institution with only a graduate program in the University of Chicago. And those are the first universities in which experimental psychological laboratories are established by men like Granville Stanley Hall, Thorndike. They go over, get these PhDs that you can only get in Prussia, the social science PhDs, come back, and on top of the education system that they've already established from Prussia, they start to establish these laboratories and other aspects that weren't a part of the original medieval model of a university. So the American Research University was to become a melding of all the components of higher education, serving a multitude of functions simultaneously. So the U.S. Office of Education offered the definition that universities are institutions in which there is considerable stress on graduate instruction, which confer advanced degrees in a variety of liberal arts fields, and which have at least two professional schools that are not exclusively technological. A university then would appear to be a department store of higher education, combining the specialized disciplines with the broader ones of the past and adding the various professional subjects like law, medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, theology, and even business. So medical schools were increasingly vulnerable in the late 19th century with the advent of stricter state licensing, designed in part to replace the art of healing with science. Their numbers thinned further in the wake of a 1910 Carnegie Commission report known as the Flexner Report, after its author, Abraham Flexner, which severely criticized many of the 155 medical colleges in the United States and Canada. Thus, the university came to combine the features of a department store and integrated knowledge production factory and a brand name. So as universities emerged as major research centers and as the classical curriculum of liberal arts colleges gave way to a more modern one, higher education became secularized. The change took place in a variety of ways. Many transformed themselves into non-sectarian liberal arts colleges. Others merged with universities to become a non-denominational divinity school. Many simply vanished. The demise in denominational institutions that trained ministers was furthered by the decreased relative demand for their services. The ratio of the average salary of Methodist and congregational ministers to that of all wage earners in manufacturing fell from 1.81 in 1890 to 1.68 in 1900, 1.44 in 1910, and 1.38 in 1925. It just didn't pay to do it anymore. You can see that they are really chipping away at our ability to continue emphasizing and living within our traditional values and the things that really matter to us. But another part of the secularization of colleges was due to the triumph of the scientific method and other aspects of secular thought that were incompatible with religious doctrine. This all goes back to science v. God. Teacher training institutions which before 1940 were often normal schools with a 2-year curriculum, later became part of state universities. The share of total enrollments accounted for by publicly controlled institutions reaches 78% by 1994. The application of the scientific method and the increased division of labor and specialization in higher education disproportionately benefited certain types of institutions. Those that had access to research funds were initially large and diverse, were non-sectarian, and had reputation and a long purse, were in the best position to prosper from the changes. More public sector institutions than private sector ones were so situated and thus flourished and expanded in the wake of the changes to the structure of knowledge that shook higher education from around 1880 to 1910. So, of course, certain private institutions also gained from the technological changes that affected higher education at the start of the formative period. Some were research and graduate institutions prior to the changes at the turn of the century, like Johns Hopkins and Chicago University. So between 1909 and today, AAU has grown slowly but steadily to the point where it now comprises 62 universities, still roughly half public and half private. Among the members are the 2 Canadian universities added in 1926, McGill and the University of Toronto. Starting in 1914, and for many years afterwards, the association functioned in no small part as an accreditation agency. Almost as soon as AAU was founded, German universities began using membership in AAU as their measure of quality for graduate school admissions. You had to have some sort of prior knowledge, learning already have happened in the AAU. And if you had that, it would open doors for your further education in social sciences in Prussia. So this era from 1890 to 1910 is considered by many historians as the new manifest destiny. Those who guided AAU in those early years included future US President Woodrow Wilson, then president of Princeton, who presided over the association's 1910 conference. Starting in the late 1930s and ever since, the association has been increasingly focused on the relationship between higher education and the federal government. So the university system subsidized by the federal government, starting with Lyndon B. Johnson's Higher Education Act of 65 as part of Johnson's The Great Society domestic agenda. It was reauthorized in 68, 72, 76, 80, 86, 92, 98, 2008. So a liberal arts department and the awarding of Bachelor and Master of Arts degrees are necessary to university designation, meaning the liberal arts are the key difference between the definition of a university and a college. To be clear, there were and still are liberal art colleges, but most were either subsumed into the local university or disappeared altogether on purpose. If any exist today, they are generally private institutions and within the Association of American State Colleges and Universities, an affiliated organization. So up until the Prussian historical schools influence, universities taught hard sciences, the classics, Greek and Latin. And it was all based around the 7 liberal arts: grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And so you can see that this disappearance of the liberal arts, this ability for us to put 2 and 2 together, to ask the proper questions, to be able to communicate back and forth with each other, was stripped out of our education system. And I don't think anybody's going to argue that it was deliberate, because the smarter and more intelligent that the society becomes, the more unnecessary becomes government. If we're all self-empowered, right, the well-developed individual is a perfect antidote to a tyrannical government. So you can see why they want to keep us dumb. I mean, these are the books that John Taylor Gatto, Charlotte Iserbyt talked about, the deliberate dumbing down of the West. Okay, and so we've just shown you how this American Association of Universities is actually a huge part of manifest destiny, and it's sprawling across North America. So when you see students protesting at universities and you have the chance, remind them of the true origins of the university system and how it is directly associated with the Morrill Land Grant Acts and expansion across the West. So I think that's all I got for you. I hope you appreciate that one. Start to show you how this network was created, and on top of which comes the internet. And so I appreciate your time. Any questions, just hit me up in the comments. I'll put any links necessary down there for you. Talk to you later.